Welcome to the Bill Kelly Podcast, critical discussions in critical times. Here's your host, Bill Kelly.
Welcome to another edition of the Bill Kelly Podcast, critical discussions in these critical times. I'm your host, Bill Kelly. Well, as we head into a new school year for most Canadian students, I guess it's inevitable because we seem to get these almost every year now. Another story about the Board of Education banning books. Now, this, tell you right up front, but I got a real problem with this. We've talked about this many times on the radio show, and I want to talk about it now, too. It's happening in Alberta. And the list has been leaked now to the media. Books like A Handmaid's Tale, the Margaret Atwood classic, and 200 other titles have been pulled from the shelves of Edmonton Public Schools. And the fact that this is happening is bad in of itself, but the justification for it, or the supposed justification for it, I find even more problematic. Books like, as we mentioned, The Handmaid's Tale, A Brave New World, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, and it goes on. Oh, and The Great Gatsby is also being banned. Why? Well, we'll get into that in just a couple of seconds. What they talk about here is they say, well, some of these books, according to the rules that have been set out here, are too explicit for students, and they simply don't want them to be exposed to this sort of stuff. Now, what is explicit and what is not? Well, that's kind of in the eye of the beholder, isn't it? And clearly the beholders here are deciding that this is what you can read and this is what you can't read. And that's really problematic. But before we chastise the Edmonton Board of Education wholly for this, the chair of the board, one Julie Kusiak, has said, look, this was not our idea. This is us being told to follow the directives from the government of Alberta, the education minister there. Books have to fall within these categories, and if they don't, then you got to pull them from the shelves. And she says, Ms. Kusiak says, we disagree with this. We think it's the wrong thing to do, but, they're our boss, and what are we going to do? So I understand her point. So let's focus on what the government of Alberta is doing right now. And basically, they're doing what a lot of MAGA governments down in the States, the crazy Ron DeSantis down in Florida, but other governors, Texas and Greg Abbott, the same sort of thing. Basically, it's a matter of simply saying, this is what you can and cannot read, this is what you can and cannot do. Well, when you get into book banning, there's a very slippery slope and a very dangerous slippery slope between that and certainly indoctrination, simply because if you remove other ideas or you remove the concept of talking about these things and having debate about these things, it's so much easier to simply say, these are the standards that you have to live by because this is what we want. We've talked about this with other forms of education, sex ed classes and things of this nature too. And it's one of these things that I guess, elected officials who always want to curry favor with certain groups are always going to oftentimes cave into. And it's the wrong thing to do. It happened here in Ontario years ago. I can remember when Doug Ford was running for premier the first time, when he was running against the Kathleen Wynne government. And I guess in an effort to curry favor with the Christian right, the extreme Christian right here in this province, he talked quite openly about banning the sex ed program that had been put in place here in the province of Ontario. Which I guess, the Christian right just loved. Now, to his credit, once Ford got elected, he kind of backed off on that, thankfully, and understood the reality here and how important that program was and how it wasn't nearly as egregious as those Christian right representatives were talking about. But that was then and this is now. But I'm always concerned when you have politicians telling us these are the standards, these are the moral standards. We don't elect them to do that. They pass laws, okay? About, how fast we can drive on the highways, about where we pay our taxes. I mean, they're supposed to be governing us. They're not supposed to be our moral compass. That's not the job of a politician. And the rationale for this, again, seems to be to appease to some very vocal minority groups. They say, well, we don't want children of a certain age to be exposed to relationships in some of the books that they've talked about here. This smells an awful lot like the old argument. By the way, one of the series of books that are being banned here, anything to do with same-sex relationships are going to be taken off the shelves too, which I guess goes all the way back to that mindset that some of these people have that, hey, if my son or daughter reads a book about same-sex relationships, it's going to turn them gay. We can't have that. I mean, how idiotic that is, but some people still hold those views. I'd like to think that the people that are running for office and are elected to office to represent us have a higher standard and a higher level of education and understanding, that books are there to help us to learn and to get us to think. that maybe this line of thinking or this line of thinking isn't as strict, and maybe it's the wrong way to go. Maybe we should be exposed to other ideas, not necessarily to embrace those other ideas, but to accept that they're there. And I think when you look at the list of some of the books that have been targeted by this government, the Alberta government, and other governments in the past, I think you get a pretty good read as to what's going on, because it's a rather illustrious list of books that have been targeted by governments and by elected officials. A Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger, banned by a lot of boards of education. A Separate Peace by John Knowles. By the way, I studied both of those books in high school, and I'm the better for it, as a matter of fact. The Chronicles of Narnia, which is a fantasy book. Yeah, about flying lions and things of that nature. But, and they say, well, it's not, it doesn't embrace our Christian values. Not everybody has Christian values. Sometimes you just want to read for escapism. Narnia are a great series of books, especially for kids. Harry Potter books have been banned in some boards of education because they're all about wizards, and that's against Catholic and Christian beliefs. Hogwash, or Hogwarts, as the case might be, that's not for them to determine. It's fantasy. It's good time reading. And basically, you don't like it, so you don't want anybody else to be able to read it. That's not what we do in this country. That's not what a democracy is all about. But that's what these people seem to be doing, is basically forcing their moral standards, such as they are, onto everybody else. And it's the wrong way to go. We have to understand that there's some great literature here that's controversial. But that's why we want to expose children at certain ages to these books, to have a discussion about this. I harken back to my days in school a long time ago. And yeah, when we talked with Catcher in the Rye, we talked with a Separate Peace and some of the other books of that time. There's some rather controversial things that are involved in that. An intelligent teacher, and I was fortunate to have a number of those, would say, okay, let's talk about this. Why did they write this? Why did this character in the book do this? And you get to talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly, and you get to think, which is really one of the things you're trying to do as a teacher, to get your students to think and to think outside the box and to understand that there's tunnel vision, and there's having a much wider perspective. People with a much wider perspective are better educated, and we're there to be educated in our system, not indoctrinated. And I tell you, there's a huge difference. But mind you, some people that are in power in governments, such as Alberta apparently right now, don't understand that difference. They just think that education equals indoctrination. No, it shouldn't, and we can't allow that to happen. And when we see it happening in boards of education, and in this particular case through provincial standards, we've got to jump up and do something about it and say something about this. Ministerial orders to say this is what you can read and this is what you can think, putting us down a very, very slippery slope. And I don't want to see that happen here. The former Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau famously said, when he was justice minister, and they basically shot down and blew up the law against homosexuality. It used to be it was a crime. Homosexuality was a crime in this country for the longest time. And Pierre Trudeau's famous quote was, "The government has no place in the bedrooms of the nation." And he was right. But to extend that to what's happening these days, especially in Alberta, the government also has no business in our libraries. That's it for this edition of the Bill Kelly Podcast. Catch us wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're on YouTube, by the way, don't forget to hit that notification bell. Please subscribe. We'd love to get your support on this to continue the great work that we're doing on the podcast. And thanks if you already have. Madeline Kelly is the producer of this, and we thank her for the great work that she's doing. Until next time, I'm Bill Kelly. Stay in touch and stay informed.
Bill Kelly Podcast brought to you by Wizen's Law, personal injury lawyers. Listen, you didn't choose to get injured, but you can choose the right lawyer. Wizen's Law, 905-522-1102 or wizenslaw.com.